Welcome back to One on One. Today, we have a special show for you. We always have a special show for you. But do you ever meet a mother or a father who says, "Oh, my child is so artistic. Oh, she's so talented." Have you ever met a child that you say, "That kid's not like other kids"? Well, today we have one of those kids who grew up, wrote a book, did a lot of interesting things. We are going to have the wonderful opportunity to speak with Renee Fleury. My name is Vin DeQuino. Here is Renee. Renee, hey, we've been friends a long time, kid.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, and you've done some things for me. I had an opportunity to see many of the things you do. Talk about you. Who are you, Renee? What do you do? Talk about all these projects and things.
Well, first and foremost, I am a photographer and a
are.
freelance graphic designer. And I do have a little boy, so he takes up most of my time. And he takes after me.
Little boys have a way of doing that.
Little kids in general.
Yeah.
Any kid.
There was two examples of your work right here. In my Mary Love Daisies, you did this cover.
Yes, I did.
My granddaughter is actually somewhere in that photo. You did a beautiful job. For Return of the Cicada, you designed this cover. But designing covers aren't the only thing you do.
No. I actually focus as far as art goes on my photography. I do a lot of events and I do shoot weddings. I'll be photographing the powwow coming up in August. I am their official photographer. And I'm also a paranormal investigator and a writer and author.
Well, we've speaking of paranormal investigations, we've been on a few. You've come with me for a number. I mean, George Denny. Wow, we did a paranormal investigation at Smalley's Inn.
And George Denny had a couple of
George
things
Denny
to say.
Came and visited for sure. That was what a chilling experience.
It was one of the most fascinating paranormal experiences I've ever had,
me
actually.
too.
And I'm really glad that we were there together for that.
I would say that was the closest I ever came to actually witnessing a paranormal experience. Remember what happened then?
I remember that he turned on the flashlight that had that big rubber button that was hard to press, and it was off.
Yeah, we had a special flashlight. We put it on the center of the table, and I said, "George, if you're listening, I need to find your sister. It seems that your sister is going to be a clue to all of this. George, can you let us know that you're here?" And oh my God.
What did he do?
That flashlight went red. The red became brighter and brighter. I've never seen a flashlight go on like that. They don't work that way.
It was one of those big LED flashlights
Yes.
until it was on in full force, and it
Yeah,
stayed
and then
on.
It went from the red to full force, and we couldn't even turn it off with a button. That was freaky. That
was pretty
really
cool.
freaky. Yeah. Yeah, and we went to the actual murder site
Yes, we did.
together. A lot of very interesting things. I believe we found his grave together.
I think we did.
Remember, we went to a grave site. George Denny, you remember, was accused of murder back in 1844. He was hanged for it. And there was a lot of questions about whether everything was really done appropriately or not. We know that many things were not appropriate. The way he was tried, the way his funeral was conducted on the steps of the courthouse, really weird things. And we were there. And when we found this one spot, we looked up and there was a relative right above that gravesite that I was able to claim as his aunt, which was really, really freaky. So you have been involved in the paranormal. You've been involved in powwows with Chief Ninham, so many things. talk to me about that activity. You have a group. You have a...
I have a group called KEPRI, Celtic Energy Paranormal Research and Investigation, and we specialize in the research and preservation of the stone chambers of New York State and the neighboring states where the chambers do branch out into. New York has the highest concentration of them, and we're looking to get them
just
protected.
so that the audience is aware, when we're talking about stone chambers, we're talking about those cave-like structures that are all over Putnam. And it's clear that some of them may be root cellars.
Some of them absolutely are root cellars.
Absolutely not root cellars. They're in the wrong place to be a root cellar, and their construction is at most suspicious. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, the stone chambers that I do not believe are root cellars. So first of all, let me back up. The ones that are root cellars, we have the names of the people who built them and the dates in which they were built. For instance, there's one on Coleshire's Court, which is on the side of Mount Nimham, and that was built by Joseph Light in 1808. However, there is a secondary chamber just up the street from the one I think is the one mentioned as a root cellar that is anomalous, and on a map in 1854, it is labeled as ruins. And other chambers have been labeled as ruins and documented as such as far back as 1654.
Not root cellar, ruins.
So if these were being marked as built as root cellars in 1808, in 1854, they would have had a clear recollection and a clear date of who had built the other one, and they wouldn't have labeled it as ruins. And again, this is going back to the 1600s that you find these clear indications that these are something other than a colonial root cellar.
And it's believed some of these may have Celtic origins, right?
Yes, Celtic, and that means Druidic origins. The argument for that is that the chambers that we think aren't root cellars, they do, a lot of them face the winter solstice. A lot of them seem to be marked with strange writings, such as, it's called Celtic Ogham. It was a script written and signed initially only by the Druids. They were the priests, priestesses, philosophers, physicians, the elite class of ancient and then later on Christian Celtic society once they were converted. So we think that anywhere between 400 and 4,000 years ago, that's a big gap, but again, nothing is known. Anywhere in that gap, they could have come over and they could have built these things. And the reason why we date it as far back as 4,000 years ago is because you do find similar but much larger structures in Ireland, England, and Scotland. And I actually had a chance to go to Ireland, to Newgrange and Noath, and to England, to a couple of their long barrows over there. And I did get to see the construction of these sites for myself. And I can tell you it's identical construction.
Wow.
They are historically dated at 4,000 and 5,000 years old. And I think that the Celtic theory holds a lot of merit. But again, certainly not all of them are so anomalous.
Wow. So, Miss Renee, this interest in the past has come to surface in a different way recently.
Yes, it has.
We have a novel just about done.
It's on its way to getting published. It is still in its second draft phase, but after that, I'm sick of working on it, and I'm going to have a quick look over, make sure everything's in order, and it will be published by the end of the year.
Wow. And I'd love to say I can pronounce this title, but I can't. What is the title of this book?
It's called Pira'a Montu.
See? How do you spell that?
P-R'-A-A-M-O-N-T-U. And it is ancient Egyptian, and it translates to Great House of Montu. And that title references the governing body at the time that this novel takes place.
Well, this is a wonderful book. I've had the wonderful opportunity to actually read this and to hear parts of it in weekly doses at the Mahopac Library Writers Group. You've been a part of that for quite some time.
I co-run the morning group.
Yes, and the morning group. And we've had an opportunity to hear what this book was about. It is an exciting tale about a woman who lived many years ago.
For over 4,000 years ago.
Over 4,000 years ago. So I probably haven't met her.
Maybe you
Well,
have, maybe you haven't.
That's right. Maybe I have. Tell us a little bit about this book. Where did it all come from? Where did you get the idea for this book, an Egyptian book? It's actually about Egyptian royalty.
It is.
Talk to me.
Well, the inception of this book began when I was 13 or 14 years old. So it's going back about well over a decade.
So what lit the fire?
I've always had an interest in history, as you know, and I've always had a fascination with ancient Egyptian history. When I was in middle school, I, funny enough, began having dreams, actually, about this ancient Egyptian time period. I didn't really understand it, but it gave me some interest, and I kind of still don't understand it to this day. Still trying to piece that together, but it fueled the writing of a novel. I started to have these ideas of, well, what if I could put this into story format? And over the years, it grew and grew and grew until I put it aside, and then I came back to it. And a couple of years ago, right around the time my son was born, I had the inspiration to start it again, and I did exhaustive amounts of research, picking up from where I left off when I was a middle schooler.
Yeah, people sometimes don't realize that even fiction takes research, serious research, and this did. And you researched Egypt, and you came up with?
I came up with a story that takes place during the 11th dynasty of ancient Egypt. It was a time fresh out of chaos. It is the beginning of what's a period known as the Middle Kingdom. It's after the pyramid building days, the Grand Pyramid building days. They were still building them, but on a much smaller scale at that time. But it's just before the New Kingdom, which is when pharaohs like Ramses the Great, Tutankhamun, and Cleopatra lived and reigned. So this is an obscure, little-known time period, but I would say it is perhaps more important than the time periods of pharaonic history that we are familiar with, simply because the pharaoh in my book, his name is Nebhepetra Mentuhotep II, or Mentuhotep II. He is a pharaoh of the Theban war god Montu. That's why the story is called Great House of Montu. The Great House was the palace, and it was the governing body, and later the word Pira'a was used to...
Now, we have an image up on the screen. What exactly is that?
That is of the pharaoh himself. He is the main character's father. She is a princess who later becomes a queen. Historically, she's known as Queen Tem. This man, Mentuhotep II, he reunited the upper and lower kingdoms of ancient Egypt. They were two disunified halves, which he brought back into the great kingdom of ancient Egypt. And he reigned 51 long, prosperous years. And his struggle to maintain this power and to bring it back to order issued the kingdom into a period of peace. And he was worshipped and even deified 1,000 years after his death, and the rules that he put in place would then last the rest of pharaonic history until ancient Egypt fell 2,000 years after his death. And his daughter, the woman who is the main character in my book, Neterefari, who later becomes Queen Tem, she is a powerful woman.
Call these people like Nettie or something. You had to use these Egyptian names, right?
Well, to be fair, her nickname in the book, called only by her lover, is Nata, so we can call her Nata if that's easier. She is a powerful young woman, and the story focuses on her rise to power and how she became the powerful and now little-known Queen Tem. And I think that it will shed some light on this obscure but very important time period.
It's a wonderful story of power and love.
And loss.
And loss. Yeah, some real twists in there and some real points of interest. I mean, you had the group nailed to the seat. You certainly had me nailed to the seat, enough so that I went back and read the whole thing from beginning to end, because getting it in little pieces like that make you nuts. It's made me nuts.
It's a story that needs to be followed from start to finish.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. But it had an interesting ending. I don't know if we want to give that away at all.
I'm not going to give the ending away.
Good
I
idea.
think it's important for my readers to get it and read it for themselves so that they can actually enjoy it. And so it keeps them on the edge of their seat, wondering what's going to happen to these characters.
So how much of the actual history did you incorporate into this novel?
Almost all of it. I've done, like I said, a lot of research on it. I delved into the language, which I do use in some of the terms I use in my novel are straight from ancient Egyptian.
And real names and
real places and the
Wow.
backstory behind the places. I have the backstory of the political turmoil and struggles that were going on in that time, and I had the characters to interplay into all of that.
Wow.
And
So what was it real?
it's a story.
What part, you know,
What part wasn't real in the book?
yeah.
Well, there's no
Or life, really. We don't know.
A lot of what I wrote about in the book, I did take literary licenses with, because we don't know a lot about these characters. But most of the history that I've read about, I did incorporate. We have no proof that this woman, Neterafari, we have no proof that that was her name. That was the name that I gave her. But her name was eventually Queen Tem. We have no proof that she had a lover. But I think that some of
And you
some
have this whole interplay with the servant boy, and oh man, and she has a child.
she does have a child, but that is historically relevant. In
She
history,
did, historically.
yes, she did have a child. He grew up to become the next pharaoh, then to Hutep III. We have no proof that he was the child by her lover. However, history records him as the child of her father. Historically, she's known as his queen. But if you go back and you read through historical record, to me, there's not enough evidence that she was ever his wife. The term king's wife meant that you were the queen. They had no word for queen. They had no word for princess or prince. It was king's daughter, king's son, king's wife. It meant that you were the queen. And if you look at her tomb, Queen Tem's tomb, compared to the rest of his queens who died early in his reign, she is there at the back of the temple, right flush against the pharaohs, one of the largest female graves ever found. And to me that says she was equal to him in death as she was in life.
Wow.
So that's where the inspiration for Nata comes from, and I really hope I've done her justice by writing what I think is her tale.
So many times I tell writers that once you do the research, and if you do it correctly, the story seems to just come from somewhere, and it just almost writes itself. Did it do that?
Absolutely. Once I got started on it, I said, I'm just going to write a couple of chapters and see where it goes. It all came out of nowhere, and I think the characters came to life. They brought me back into that research, which I really enjoyed doing. I picked up a dead language as a result from it, and they wrote themselves. The book wrote itself.
One of my favorite scenes in a TV sitcom was in Happy Days, when the Fonz stands in front of the mirror, he pulls a comb out of his pocket, goes to comb his hair and goes, ah. Did that happen at the end of the book? When that book finally, when the last word hit the page, did you have to go back and do some serious work? Or did you say, this is it, this is my story?
A little bit of both. Most of the book is perfect the way it is. However, like any piece of work, it does need a lot of editing.
Yeah.
Some pieces, was tidied up, and I am actually adding in a few pieces that I realized I'd missed.
So you're
important
still
pieces.
working on it.
But it's getting close to completion. And for the majority of it, even my editor, who's a professional editor for a living, he doesn't have as much to say about it as I thought he would. And when a professional editor likes your work the way it is, to me that says
Yeah, that says a lot.
it says a lot, and I'm quite proud of myself for having written a rough draft that is that good. I'm very surprised.
So you're almost there.
I'm almost there, and I'm like on the edge of my seat going, when is this
Are
book
there
going to be out?
parts that still haunt you that you say, maybe I need to do a little bit more with this chapter or that chapter?
Absolutely. One of the characters, I am in the process of amping up his character, and he's the villain. He's the sadistic, egomaniacal governor, the nomarch from the south. His name is Lord Ketty, and he is the main character's betrothed. He's also her first cousin. They kept it in the family back in those days.
Yeah. Ray Bradbury, an incredible science
My favorite
fiction
author. I love him.
incredible science fiction author. A kid said to him, "Mr. Bradbury, how do you know when your book is done?" And Ray Bradbury said, "When I can read from the first page to the last without making any changes."
Then it's
I said,
done.
"Good luck with that." Because every time I read through my books, I read through my books dozens and dozens of times. I'm doing that with the book I'm doing now. I just keep going through, and every time I go through,
You find
I
something
make
else.
more changes. You've been doing that as you've been going along. When is the hopeful day?
You know what? I'm going to make the deadline my son's third birthday. It will be December 22nd of this
Nice.
year.
So you're aiming for December 22nd as the final date. Hopefully the manuscript will be ready.
I hope for it to be published. You know what?
Published by then.
By
Whoa.
then, that's going to be my deadline. And a funny, interesting little coincidence is the son of the main character. Historically, he would have been 2 years old in 2016 BC. And my little boy is 2 years old in AD 2016.
Whoa, that's pretty freaky.
I did the math. I figured that out one day, and I freaked out myself.
It's amazing how coincidences seem to be, but first lines in emails to a paranormal, no such thing as coincidence. Just no such thing.
You've taught me that over the years, and I've truly come to believe that.
Yep, we've been through quite a few
Yeah, we have.
coincidences that really were just too fantastic to be coincidences. So, are there spirits out there? Was there some thing out there working with you to create this book? Maybe.
I believe
People
there
ask me
was.
that about hauntings of the Hudson River Valley, and I tell them, absolutely. I just feel that Sybil Luddington, there's no way that she was going to stay dead when so much information about her was wrong. Printed information.
That's exactly how I feel about Neterafari. And, in many ways, I feel I am Neterafari. I feel I know her story in ways that nobody else does. And she spoke to me and she said, write my story. Look into me and look into my family and make my story your own. And that's exactly what I did.
So this book was meant to be told. I feel the same way about Sybil. I feel the same way about George Denny. Sometimes we are moved to do what we need to do. If there is a spiritual world, and I believe there is, and there is a way to connect, seems to be a way to connect to writers. You have made a connection. You have made a connection for people. You have found a way to get to where people are. We can only thank you for that. We can read the book. How do you pronounce that book again?
Montu, and
Montu.
Great House of
The
Montu.
Great House of Montu.
It will be available in December of this year.
Wonderful. Urge people to read it. It's certainly worth reading. You were certainly worth coming here today.
Thank you.
It was just a treat. I believe we may still have a minute. Any final words?
come to the Native American Festival, the powwow, on August 20th.
Every year there's a powwow at the Veterans Memorial Park.
Yes, this year is August 20th and 21st. I am there as their photographer. They're my tribe and my family. It is a wonderful event that I think everybody should attend.
Good way to connect to the spiritual world.
And visit my website, CelticEnergy.com. That's Celtic with a K, if you're interested in learning more about the stone chambers.
Sounds great. How we doing, gang? We're good with time? Well, looks like we're about ready to sew it all up.
Thank you for having me,
Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. It has been absolutely our pleasure to have you here.
Just call it Great House of Montu.
Yeah, the Great House of Montu. Egyptian story, well worth reading.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in.